think given that we're all immigrants, which is something that people often forget, one generation and they've suddenly forgotten and they're pointing fingers at other immigrants who shouldn't, quote unquote, shouldn't be here. What's your background and history and familiarity with what you're optimizing for in a new space or a new country? I think those who have been here for a long time or a longer time, it depends on how those values and attributes, characteristics, that hunger gets carried forward. So the question is, what is the immigrant mindset?
I talk to entrepreneurs, high-level entrepreneurs all the time. And what I tell them is you're working so hard for your family, and yet you're not there to be with your family because you're working so hard. So where is that balance?
From the perspective of balance, I think about it in three domains: your relationships with people at work, your relationships at home, and in your relationship with yourself. The reality is vulnerability and accepting our weak spots, accepting that emotion is not effeminate as we tend to frame it up, but it's actually human. If you don't have mental ease, if your sleep is not great, if you have to rely on more than the usual amount of alcohol or other drugs and substances to find balance, satisfaction, calm, or happiness. These are all measures that you as a person forget about entrepreneurship. About a year ago or so, I probably never would have said to anybody that I'm in therapy. About 4.5 years now, I've been doing therapy, except for my partner and my mother. They were the only people who knew, even my best friends. I just never...
I'm Garrett Wong, and this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you? So Kenyada, I have a burning question for you here because we're hard working entrepreneurs here. What is the biggest thing that you see in burnout in men, and even men in particular, working such long hours trying to provide for their families?
Well, I think the biggest question that really needs to be asked by those people who are experiencing burnout, who are working hard to provide for their families, etc., is: are you working according to your own paradigm and what you think is important or what you think they want? Or are you actually engaging them and monitoring what they are actually saying, but also how their actions are lining up with what they're saying? Because there could be a disconnect between those two things. But more fundamentally, I think many of us have a disconnect between what they say or would even say, and certainly what they want, when compared to what it is that we want or what we think needs to happen. Obviously, to some extent, that may be in service of the family. It may be in service of the overall approach, but a lot of that is rooted in our own history and our own backgrounds and the things that we may have thought as children were important or that our parents instilled in us. And oftentimes we're working from a place of lack, and we're trying to make up for that in the next generation. But oftentimes that has nothing to do with what is actually relevant to them, because their experience, let's say, in the as it relates to children, their experiences, our children, are generally not the experiences that we've had as children. And so a lot of what is sort of feeding into our motivation and our desire to execute in very specific ways may not even align with what they want.
That's interesting. There's something that I've heard asked on other podcasts. Sometimes I ask that on mine, but entrepreneurs, do you think they're born or bred?
I imagine it's a combination to some extent, but I would lean much closer to being bred. If you put it that way, I would say it's more nurture than nature. But again, that depends on when we're talking about, what period are we talking about? What's the context? So if you're in a purely survival sort of subsistence environment, hyper competitive, then you're probably going to be more entrepreneurial out of necessity. If you're in an environment like probably you and I live, in the West or in the United States, it's very easy to get a job. It's not difficult at all. It may not be the job you want or the lifestyle that gets provided as a result, but your ability to survive and even to thrive at some level is relatively easy to do. And so as a result of that, we're really talking about how comfortable can one be? And so I think that's a great question. And I've actually never really thought about it across contexts or across time before now. But I think that is probably how I would answer that. I think in certain environments, it's much easier not to be entrepreneurial because there's such a cushion and a backdrop. And in other instances, you absolutely have to be entrepreneurial. Now, the thing I'd add to that is, and a lot of people say, well, I have a company. and they may have a company, but they really just own their jobs. There's nothing
Exactly.
wrong with that.
Lifestyle business. Yep. 100%.
Absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful if you're able to provide for yourself and manage your schedule and have some of the variety and the benefits of managing your own job or owning your own job. But owning a company is also quite different. So even when we think about what it means to be entrepreneurial, are we talking about job creation? Are we talking about scaling? Are we talking about asymmetrical growth and productivity and contribution? Or are we talking
Responsibility.
about that's right. Or are we talking about something that's more around subsistence? So I think there are a number of levels of thinking of that question. It's a great question.
Yeah, no, I think about this often, and you bring up a really super interesting point because when we're talking about, like, for example, I mean, I work 18 hours a day. I've got four companies. Um, my main one is property management, and I'm super stressed with it because it's tenants and toilets. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I want
Okay.
to put my energy into my other businesses because it's
Hmm.
creativity, it's passion. I feel so good when I'm doing it. And then I open up my email and I have another owner that wants to speak to me and not my staff. And so I often wonder, my own work ethic, is that because my parents were immigrants? And so that's where I think you're kind of going there versus like that desperation that you have. Maybe I wasn't a newcomer. I was born here in Canada. um, I don't want to say privileged life, but certainly not a hard life. And then I have employees in their early 20s that choose to leave home and come here and make a life for themselves. We've all heard of that whole thing with the clothes on my back. Those people have like resilience. Do you find in your work that that makes a difference?
I think that's a good question. I think well, first of all, what I think matters, and I think you're kind of getting to immigration and the immigrant mindset. I think given that we're all immigrants, which is something that people often forget,
Yeah.
one generation and they've suddenly forgotten and they're pointing fingers at other immigrants who shouldn't be here, quote unquote, shouldn't be here. But
Mm.
if you think about the recency of immigration, I think that has an effect. I think where you're from, frankly, probably has some effect. What are you emphasizing? What are you optimizing for? What's your background and history and familiarity with what you're optimizing for in a new space in a new country? I think those who have been here for a long time or a longer time, it depends on how those values and attributes, characteristics, that hunger gets carried forward. So you can have people who are several generations in, but who have somehow never forgotten or have always been reminded maybe the values, if there's a family business, the values have been upheld and you've got culture carriers from one generation to another. And sometimes we see that. Sometimes you see that the original business, and oftentimes obviously, not just because of inflation or development, but or naturally occurring development, but actually people applying themselves to a business, expanding it, growing it, not just siphoning or consuming from one generation to another, but actually expanding meaningfully. And so I think it really varies. However, what I would say is not so much, I wouldn't think so much about the person or the group. I'll think about the characteristics, the mindset, the
Hmm.
paradigm, the
Mm.
paradigm. So you can have persons who actually were not explicitly or recently immigrants, but who've adopted that mindset, who can actually do well. So the question is, what is the immigrant mindset?
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I'm sure the audience is kind of wondering what we're talking about here and what the talk with the podcast is. Why don't we roll it back a little bit? Maybe give the audience a bit of a background, and then frame that to what you're really passionate about. Because I know you've had a long, very decorated career. You've done a lot of things, but I want you on the podcast today because of exactly the value that you're bringing to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm from the Bahamas. I grew up there. I did 2 years of university there. I moved to Colorado for 15 years or thereabouts to finish school, get a master's in accountancy, and did Big Four and all the rest of that. Then I moved to New York approximately the same amount of time, 15 years or so ago. And I've worked at the big banks and done some of that. So I've done about 25 years, just this fall actually will be 25 years in corporate America, mostly finance and banking, or most recently, and at the most senior level in my career. But and that was great. by the way. Let me be very clear. I have no qualms really about it. Certainly nothing significant or material. I benefited a great deal. I learned a ton. I've made some built some incredible relationships. But at the end of the day, for me, when I think about what is my greatest contribution, how am I going to feel the most fulfilled? How am I probably going to even, beyond the social contribution, how am I going to contribute economically most meaningfully to myself, to my family, and to the community by giving back? I don't see it sitting behind a desk or in an office, certainly not doing what I was doing. And so a big part of the driver there was personal, but it was also based on my observation that a lot of people tend to be quite unhappy doing what they're doing. I caution against, you know, I would encourage people to do the things that they love, obviously, for work. That's easy. I would say your baseline should be at a minimum not something you hate or can't generally stand, or with people that you can't generally stand. But oftentimes I've observed that it is that third group, that people are just really exchanging, the money and their happiness in a very transactional way. And so one of the
Mm,
things that I've been working towards is trying to help people to find that balance and that fulfillment. But fundamentally, it's going to come from the relationship that you have with yourself, not the relationship at work, not the relationships even at home. But how do you view yourself? How do you view your time? How do you view your contribution? How much do you believe in your ability to go back to your first or second question? How entrepreneurial can you be, even in your career? So maybe you don't start a company of your own, but am I willing to take a chance and move out of this in pursuit of something that makes me feel more happy or more fulfilled? And so sort of challenging that through my own experience and observation, trying to help others is something I'm really passionate about.
yeah, I think my business coach said it best. I think just yesterday. There's so many people who just they say, "Oh, my purpose is to give back," and he was like, "Well, before you can give back, you have to give to yourself."
That's right.
Right, and that's what you're talking about here, because I think if we're not true to ourselves, and that sounds very like foo-foo a little bit,
Yeah,
but in all seriousness, right, I talk to entrepreneurs, high level entrepreneurs, all the time, and what I tell them is you're working so hard for your family, and yet you're not there to be with your family because you're
that's
working
right.
so hard. So where is that balance? Can you
Exactly.
talk to us about balance and your views on that?
Yeah, so you raise a couple interesting points there, and that's sort of one of the things that I alluded to earlier on when we're kind of defining what we think they need or what they want instead of actually asking them or observing them. What's their reaction when you're at home and engaging versus when you're not? And by the way, don't be discouraged in the beginning because maybe they're not used to having you around. Maybe they're accustomed to now just, particularly if you come home and you're in a bad mood. So now daddy's home
Hmm.
and it reflects his life outside of here and the pressures that he is facing and the things that he doesn't even want to do. He's not even happy in his life. So he makes us all miserable. We kind of don't want him around. So if you're trying to pivot and now you're around, you've got to probably, deal with a little bit of a dip. But you're going to have to kind of persist and continue to work on that. I think from the perspective of balance, I think about it in three domains, and I think I've touched on them a little bit. Your relationships with people at work, your relationships at home, and in your relationship with yourself. And you mentioned, something that sounds a little bit foo-foo, and I'll kind of jump on that. But the reality is, vulnerability and accepting our weak spots, accepting that emotion is not effeminate as we tend to frame it up, but it's actually human. I
Yeah.
think that is where you're going to really start to see a tremendous amount of rebalance. I think calibration and then the ability to really kind of, I don't want to say live your purpose, but I'm going to say certainly pursue a happier, more fulfilled life. Because right now we're generally operating according to a script that,
Hmm.
yeah, we've accepted and maybe we've built in, but it's socially and societally the script that's been given to us in terms of what it means to be successful, what it means to be productive, what it means to be a protector, what it means to be a useful contributor economically, even a father or a husband or a partner, compared to what we want and what actually is useful from a human perspective or even sustainable, right? Because oftentimes what we're doing is not sustainable. So, there are many different ways to think about this, many different ways I could discuss it. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions there
No,
because you
you,
might have
you
had a
are for
couple.
sure. It's a
Okay,
deep
okay.
discussion. It's definitely a deep discussion. And I have a follow up question for you. In your work with entrepreneurs, can an entrepreneur truly be happy? Right?
Absolutely.
Or let me frame that. Have
Yeah.
in your work, do you see a lot of happy entrepreneurs?
So that's okay. So that's a good question, and my mind is now racing in so many different directions. So you might have to pull me back in by simply repeating the question at some point. But a couple of things. The first thing is I don't know that happiness is necessarily a consistent state. I don't believe that it is. I would think of happiness, not that laughter necessarily denotes happiness, but I think of happiness on the same spectrum, sort of peaking in the same way that laughter peaks. So if someone was always laughing, you would think that there's something probably wrong with that person. I don't mean someone who laughs frequently, but I mean
Right.
someone who was always laughing. Because laughing laughs are sort of punctuation marks, right? Along a spectrum of the passage of time or engagement. I think happiness is oftentimes confused with contentment or gratitude. I feel content and I focus on that. I focus on gratitude as kind of the high water mark, with happiness sort of punctuating. Now, it depends on how we define it. Some people could define it that way and say they want to pursue happiness. For me, I'm okay not being happy. The key is I don't want to be unhappy. I want to be grateful. I want to be content. But from an entrepreneurship perspective, and this gets back to your original question, I think innovators and people who are entrepreneurial, particularly in this environment where it's not a requirement per se, like I said, you can go out and get a job, you can be comfortable. Entrepreneurship takes it to another level, and that's generally the level of seeking a solution or optimizing for something else. For me, that generally is derived from a lack of satisfaction, a lack of contentment, not a lack of gratitude, but oftentimes if you have those other things, then you're not happy on a regular, on a go forward basis. You see problems that need to be solved, and they're significant enough for you to dedicate time, meaningfully, capital, to pull people together, to take risk, to actually solve. You may see some opportunity in its solution, but presumably you've made that your mission because you think that it's something that needs to be resolved in a meaningful way. So it doesn't mean that you can't be happy while also doing that. But I imagine for someone who has four companies, then maybe you're four times at risk of not being happy. I don't know, but certainly there's a lot that entrepreneurs may have weighing them down, and I think it just requires the same way that you're being entrepreneurial about business, you have to be entrepreneurial about your own mental and emotional health.
I love lists, as my listeners know. Can you? And I mean, you can think about this, and we can answer it later. But I mean, maybe you can come up with it. I'm sure you have it off the top of your head. Can you give me like the top? Give me the top three things that an entrepreneur should ask themselves to know that their mental health and their energy is where it should be.
I don't know that three things. I'll probably end up coming up with three things, but I don't have a list at the ready. But what I would say is how you feel about yourself actually is a pretty good indication. The feedback that you get from the people around you, whether or not it's verbal or explicit, is a pretty good indicator. One of the things you should think about, as well as a key metric and measure, or a category or suite of measures, is your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, particularly since we're probably all or mostly middle age, and you probably have a listenership that is comparable. If you're not eating well, resting well, hydrating properly, and getting some kind of exercise in periodically, if you're not meditating, journaling, if you don't do therapy, if you don't have mental ease, if your sleep is not great, if you have to rely on more than the usual amount of alcohol or other drugs and substances to find balance, satisfaction, calm, or happiness. These are all measures that you as a person, forget about entrepreneurship, you as a person are probably not, certainly not even optimized, but you're just not functioning appropriately. And so while we think about entrepreneurship in business measures and metrics, I think we need to first think about it fundamentally because, and you may have heard this before, Garrett, when we're healthy, we have 1,000 problems. When we're sick, we have just one.
Mm-hmm.
And so at its core, you don't run businesses. They're going to outlive you. Or they're not going to thrive and they're going to fade because you're not where you need to be. So the first thing you need to focus on is you. Your health is your wealth. And so I think it's very, maybe not easy, but it's relatively clear when those things are out of whack. Even if your business is performing well, again, it's probably not going to be sustainable or you won't be around to enjoy it.
The one thing that you said is, look at those around you and as for signs, right? But,
Yeah.
I'll challenge you a little bit because I think entrepreneurs, especially ones that are high performing, they get a lot of negativity from their own environment, right? Whether it's friends, family, you're working too hard, why aren't you spending time with us? And so that challenge that I'm saying to you is, where is that line that an entrepreneur can actually look around them? Like, certainly it's feedback,
Right.
but how much of that do they internalize? And I mean, we're all entrepreneurs, we all have partners and spouses, and those arguments, and you're working too long and you're not here, you can't drive Susie to her baseball game. I mean,
Right.
we've all heard it, whether you're male or female.
Right.
What are tell me about that.
Well, I think that's a reasonable challenge, but I think it's frankly a little bit surface if people actually came back with that for a couple of reasons. One, because the feedback shouldn't be ignored in broad strokes. If someone is saying you're not here enough, the question that I would pose is, what does being here mean? So I think understanding kind of those love languages. Are you talking about quality time? Or are you talking about you just need to be comfortable that you know where I am? Or if I'm here, you're still kind of not engaging me? Or what does that mean? Does being here necessarily mean that you're unhappy with my engagement? Because it could just mean, participating in some of the things that
Right.
they think are important. So it's really important for us to understand what's important. In terms of where the feedback comes from, however, yes, absolutely. I've been discouraged from doing a million things by people who love me very much, but who just
Hmm.
don't have the experience or the risk appetite or the vision that I have. And of course, that's very common. I'm sure you've experienced it tons, and so have
100%.
others. The question is, though, why is that where we're getting our feedback primarily? Or even exclusively. I think we can argue maybe for why it's primarily because these are the people who are literally in our lives. They're in our space.
Sure.
But are you also getting feedback from a business coach? Are you getting feedback from a therapist? Are you
Yes.
getting feedback from other entrepreneurs who seem to have the right balance and who are listening to this show or who are doing podcasts like you? People should be
Yes.
listening to you, for example, in terms of how to achieve that. So I think it's frankly a little bit of a cop out if people say, well, I can't listen to my wife or I can't listen to my father because they just don't get it. Sure,
They don't understand. Yeah.
there's plenty of things they don't understand and plenty of things they don't get, but they also can provide you with a perspective that's very fresh and that's untainted by your own biases. So if you're not listening to them because of their bias, how much are you listening to yourself with your own bias? These are the types of questions that I think you really have to listen to or check in with. And I'll give you just a quick paradigm in terms of how I operate. So I will watch during the political seasons, to the extent that I watch them. I'll watch the Democratic National Convention and I will watch the Republican National Convention. Why? Because they're both telling the truth and they're both telling lies.
Yeah.
And if I listen to a presidential debate, there is what they say, what the other person says, and what's probably true, and it's probably somewhere in the middle, or
Yes.
it may lean more on this side on this topic, and it may lean more on the other side of the other topic. And so I think the same way that we're critical in thinking about different news sources for around the same stories or around the same risks, is the same way that I think we should contemplate our own feelings, our own thoughts relative to the feedback that we get from our family, relative to the feedback we get from other people who are also experiencing what we experience.
Yeah, that is, you and I are going to get along just fine. That's exactly how I approach politics, honestly. And I always tell, it's such an emotionally charged topic. And I'm like, they're like this whole thing with the war in Iran, right? And I'm on those news channels, and my friends
Right,
and family are like, why are you listening to that? Because I want to see what their perspective is. I want to
right,
see what's coming out of that. Because, like you said, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
right.
Yeah. So why don't we not a pivot necessarily, but tell me how you operate. How are you helping an entrepreneur? I really want to. I want to hear the framework that because it's very interesting. I think going to be very valuable for our listeners.
Yeah, well, maybe can you elaborate on that a little bit, or
Well, I mean, I have you on as a guest. Like
yeah.
you've done a lot of things. Do you coach people? Do you have programs? What did you like? What is your advice for people? How do you work with people?
I see. Okay, great. Yeah. So I've got the executive parent company, which is a play on words. One being an executive, being a father of a 5-year-old daughter, but also it's a holding company. And through the executive parent company, I do coaching. And so I do business coaching, I do executive coaching, I do life coaching. Why? Because as an individual, you are all of those things, or you possess all of those things. You exist in all of those contexts. You have your personal life, your health, you have your business, which can certainly require some help and assistance, etc. And you're also operating as an executive. And so I find, by the way, most executive coaches have never been executives. Many of them have never even worked in business.
100%. I call those gurus, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So, having been actually an executive on Wall Street at the two biggest firms in this
And I read
country,
about
certainly.
Harvard as well, right? I
Yep,
mean,
yep,
this, yeah.
yep. So I've got some interesting. I've been fortunate to be pulled into or recruited into or accepted into a variety of places with tremendous perspective, strong networks, great history, and I've benefited pretty meaningfully from that. And so that's what I leverage in my coaching. And by the way, I'll just be quite transparent. About a year ago or so, I probably never would have said to anybody that I'm in therapy. About 4.5 years now, I've been doing therapy, except for my partner and my mother. They were the only people who knew, even my best friends. I just never raised it. But I raise it here and now because one, I think it also provides and enhances my own perspective as a coach, as an executive, as a father, as an individual. And it has strengthened my ability to use some of those tools to enhance my own tools in the various paradigms that I've employed and to help other people. And also, I raise it because I'm a strong advocate of it and for it. It's not that something is wrong with you that you're necessarily doing therapy. It's the same way that you go to get, sorry, the same way that you go to get a haircut, or you go to get a facial, or you go to get a massage, or you have your annual checkup. It's the same way that you can do that for your emotions and mentally. It's mental hygiene, and so I'm an advocate for it, which is a part of why I mention it. But it also colors how I approach my work and how I approach my life.
Well, you gave analogies of, physical things, but let's use the analogy that the body is a machine, which I think we
Yeah.
can all agree.
Yep.
And do you just drive your car until it breaks down? Or do you do oil changes? Do you tune ups, recalls? Of
Right.
course you do, right? And
Right.
so why are
Right.
we not treating our bodies the same way?
Right.
I think the world has a lot of coaches,
Sure does.
and you are credible. Let's spend a couple minutes talking about that though, because I think a lot of people they discount coaching, they discount help, they
Sure.
discount therapy.
Right.
I used to be one of those, but
Hmm.
if I had gotten coaching, and I mean, I talk to my business coach at least weekly. If I had that 30 years ago when I started my first business, my property management real estate business, I know I would be further ahead. I know that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I believe it collapses time. What is your perspective on coaching and getting help and just balance?
Well, it absolutely does. I mean, this is the whole purpose of mentorship, for example. The reason that we have mentors, the reason that we read books on topics, the reason that we watch YouTube or take courses, it's because we're able to distill what has taken however many years or how much time to perform, then however much time to analyze and evaluate, then condense into something that is usable and then transmit over to you. So coaching is fundamental. And by the way, whether or not you formally accept coaching, you're going to be coached one way or another. Life is going to kind of coach you. But the idea is you don't want to be coached in a haphazard way or with downside risk, right? If you lose all your money, well, that's a kind of coaching, if you're
Yeah.
aware enough to take your lessons and not just to blame other people or whatever the case is. Coaching is absolutely imperative. So yes, I agree that it saves time, but what it also does is allows for the wisdom that's within you, and this is what I say about therapy, allows for the wisdom that's already within you, but that's sort of disaggregated or maybe unexcavated, to be pulled together, and for someone to say, hey, how do you feel about this now? Because 6 months ago, you said something that I thought was interesting that I observed in the notes as I was preparing for our session today. Where do you think the arc is? So the ability to have somebody who is unbiased, not really invested in any particular aspect of your life, but you as a whole human, to be able to have those observations of you and to raise those and share those with you, I think is absolutely phenomenal. It's something that I appreciate in my own engagements with my therapist, but also that I appreciate very much in my engagement with my clients and they find incredibly useful.
There's one thing, and I'll call it a phenomenon, and it might just be with me, but
Yeah,
let's just say choose a problem that I might have. And let's say it's a computer problem and I'm waiting on tech support, and finally the person logs in and there's a screen share, and you can tell me if this has ever happened to you, or maybe a listener can think about that. And you're demonstrating what the problem is that you can't find. And then because you're verbalizing it, you're like, oh, yeah, I
absolutely.
was doing this wrong. And so
Totally.
what I'm saying is the process of verbalizing a problem, the process of talking to another person, is just another way, instead of keeping things in your head, that you just need to do that to be able to even know that you have problems.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And maybe this is a part of the reason that journaling, for example, is useful for
Hmm.
people. They're not actually, speaking, uh, in a literal sense, but oftentimes as we're writing or reading, our inner voice provides some clarity. Also, taking the space is really useful. One of the things that I've heard said about therapy, and may not be true for many people, but it is true for a significant number of people. This may be the only time in your entire week or whenever you do it that you don't have your telephone with you, that presumably you don't have outside or external distractions, and it may be the only time that you get to speak when no one is either interrupting you or asking you additional questions about something that you don't particularly care about. So you're
Hmm.
very focused. This is a focused time, focused on you, focused on a problem with external exclusions during that time. And so, even for that reason alone, it's very valuable. But if you're able to at least replicate that, so it doesn't have to be therapy, but if you can replicate that in your journaling, finding a quiet moment, replicate that through meditation, through taking a walk, even if it's a solo trip, and you might have to get a hall pass for that. That may be a lot of work. But even if it's a solo trip, even if it's a day trip, when
Hmm.
you're not working, just because you're not at home doesn't mean that you need to capitalize and optimize on that through your work. A part of it is just through your health, through creating space. And again, that's that mental health aspect that we're talking about. So I think there's plenty there for people to think about, but also to refine and to adapt in their own individual time and space.
It's very interesting you say that about journaling. I don't journal as much. I used to, actually. I journaled every single day for a year, and it was so transformational for me. But one thing that I kind of just started doing a few months ago is what I call a strategic walk. So, I mean, I get up
Okay.
at 4:45 in the morning and I exercise for half an hour, and that's when I'm kind of listening to a podcast,
Yep.
doing some emails, delegating some things to staff, do a stretch after that. I used to then go for a walk and then I'd listen to another podcast. And
Yeah.
I think what happened was accidentally I forgot my phone or something like that. So I had to walk with the dog for 45 minutes and just listen to my own thoughts. Can you even imagine? And what came out of that was just amazing stuff. Ping pong balls going around in my head.
Yep.
And
Yep.
every single time I do this, and I try to do it 7 days a week, I have ideas, I have clarity, and I wouldn't have that if I didn't have. And it's very important, if you're listening to this, and maybe write it down. For me, I can't have anything. I have to be completely
Right.
unplugged. I can't listen
Right.
to anything. I can't have my phone on me. And then when I come back, I have to write down everything because
Yep.
it's so great.
Yeah. No, I find that to be true. And in fact, in my walk, there's a place that I'm usually heading toward. And I sit there when the weather's nice. and I make notes of the things that I've been thinking about, the 20 minutes or
Mm-hmm.
so that it takes to get there. I'm often thinking about things and kind of solving them because I've got a view, a nice view over the river, and I can just kind of sit there and enjoy the view. And then I make my way back. And for that reason, I stop listening to podcasts during my walk. I certainly don't listen to music during that time, because whose ideas do I need to listen to all the time that aren't mine? I need to make sure that there's enough time for me to digest what's been happening, for me to think about problem solve, but also just to give my mind time and room to play. And so I find that extremely useful. So coming back and writing it down is very helpful, but even sometimes I find that I will just stop on the walk to capture maybe not just thoughts, but maybe the sequence or the organization of particular thoughts and how they interplay with one another. Synthesizing for me is a lot of fun. And it kind of comes, relatively easily and naturally, I must say, and I'm very happy about that. I feel very privileged about that. But sometimes things can be so specific in the way they connect that I need to stop what I'm doing right then to make sure that I capture it exactly as I'm thinking about it and as I would like to remember it.
Yeah. Um, I can't stress enough how important like journaling and just being alone in your thoughts is, just to be able even to be successful in business or life. Very important.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask, you've worked with so many entrepreneurs. Can you like recommend from a general sense what a good daily routine would be for just for balance? I'm not saying you have to tell somebody to get up at 4 in the morning, but
Sure.
and what would you like? What have you put in place for your clients?
Yeah, so I think that kind of advice is a little bit problematic when people say, "Well, Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates gets up. Here's what they eat for breakfast." Okay, well, that's going to make you a billionaire. That's going to make your company successful. It's going to
I
make
want
you
what he's eating.
happy. And by the by the way, I mean they're just like the rest of us, right? They've had failed
Yeah.
relationships, and that's kind of well established. And sometimes have gotten themselves into a little bit of trouble with their associations. But I think you know understanding first and foremost that there is no one size fits all. You have to do what is right for you. According to your desires, according to your specific objectives and goals, and also according to what your life and others in it require. However, one thing. This here's my book, or one of my books, the New Alpha. And in the New Alpha, there's a chapter, I think chapter 6, where I refer to wobbling well. And I think this is really important. I'm suffering from allergies, so this one eye won't stop, won't stop running. It's been a tough week for that. But when you think about cyclists, if you see people at the Tour de France coming towards the finish line or in the Olympics, when do you ever see the bike just consistently upright? That sounds like a casual ride, a very easy ride. That's not somebody pumping and pedaling and
Hmm.
trying to win something. So the bike is constantly pivoting and waving and wobbling under the pressure and under the effort. However, we don't generally see the bike fall, right? There is a balancing. It's sort of like a swinging pendulum. If you were to take snapshots of a pendulum swinging, almost never will you see that it's straight up and down. It's going to be a little to the left, a little to the right, or plenty to the left or right. The same is true of our routines, that I think they need to be flexible enough to account for life's wobbles and the pendulum swinging. Sometimes we're going to have sick kids, or you're going to have a sick parent, and that may be over a longer period or a longer term. There may be periods when your relationships, your marriage or other relationships aren't going as well. Even maybe a business partnership isn't going as well as you would have liked and requires more attention. So, for me to give somebody a specific piece of advice, I think there's a huge caveat that needs to account for what season of life are you in, what season of life is your business in, and what are the requirements going on around that. Having said that, which is really important to say, I would say you've got to make sure, at least for me personally, I make sure that I do something that I really enjoy. I collect fragrance, so I'm happy to, and I wear different fragrances depending on the day. I open up the drawer in the cupboard and I kind of, whatever hits me and what is my mood. That's
Hmm.
something that I do for me. So what is it that you do for you? Maybe it's a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Make sure that you have something that's easy but that brings you pleasure and enjoyment that doesn't have anything to do with work, that just appeals to you as a human being. So I think that's an important aspect. Some of the things we've spoken about, a little bit of exercise, a little bit of quiet time. I do what I call micro meditations. When I'm sitting down and I'm feeling particularly stressed, I do sort of a body scan, and this can take literally a couple of seconds. And I'll just kind of sit there, drop my shoulders, relax my muscles in my jaw. Oftentimes, I'll do this thing, which is to unstick my tongue from the roof of my mouth. If I tell your listeners to do that, I bet you that there are quite a few of them who didn't realize, but the tension in their jaw is actually causing their tongue to stick to the roof of their mouth. If I say just relax the muscles around your eyes,
Mm.
well, ostensibly, there may be no particular visible evidence that you've relaxed the muscles around your eyes, but in so doing, you've probably relaxed your entire face and you felt that in your whole head, right? So there are certain things that I do that I encourage others to do, my clients. I kind of put them through some of those very simple things, give them some very simple tools, which I've now shared with your listeners,
Hmm.
that I think they find very useful. And interweaving those into your day is much more powerful, I think, than getting up at a time or eating this much protein or whatever. Drinking a lot of water is important as well, and getting rest. I would say those are really, really critical.
Yeah, that is a great place to almost wrap up. I will be putting, your note link to the book, how people can get in touch with you. But I do want to hear one more answer because I ask this question of every single podcast guest. Want to hear what you have to say. So this is called the Investing to Win podcast. But how do you define success, and what does winning look like for you?
Yeah, I think success is balance. I think it's contentment, and it's about making sure that the people we care about most and who we want to succeed most, however that is defined, either by them or by us together, that they are in the best position to do that. So at the end of the day, another million might not make that much of a difference in the scheme of things when time is the most finite thing that we have. So I think how much time you spend doing the things you care about meaningfully, truly, that build relationships, not just companies, is what matters. And to me, that's success. You've got plenty of people with plenty of money who've burned through all their relationships, have been miserable or lonely at this point, and that's not what creates longevity. That's not what creates sustainability. That's not what helps to facilitate health. So for me, that's how I measure health. Earlier on, some at some point in the podcast, you referenced also giving back, and that's something I wanted to kind of circle back to. I think there's plenty of benefit in giving back, but the reality is giving back doesn't only mean money. So I think we need to be careful about that. It doesn't only mean spending time giving keynote addresses. Our legacy isn't built at the end. It's built every single day by the choices we make, every single day by the way we treat people, every single day by the time we spend with our kids or with our partners. It means taking a vacation because a lot of that stimulation, a lot of those ideas come from the time off, come from going to different places and different exposures. So to me, if you're not doing those things, you're not successful. If your measures and metrics pertain only to one aspect of your life, no matter how much you're knocking it out of the park, you're just not successful. And I'll give you one last example. The CPA exam is no longer like this. But when I took the CPA exam, it was of course over 2 days, four exams over 2 days. You didn't get to spread them out and take them kind of when you wanted to. And even if you got 99, which was the highest on three sections, if you got 49, or less on any section, you failed all of it. So the point is, you cannot over-index on just those areas and leave one where you kind of ignore it. You have to make sure that even your worst area is still tethered to your areas of success. And I think the analogy there is pretty clear for entrepreneurs.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's been very valuable. Myself as an entrepreneur really appreciate your insights. And again, entrepreneur to entrepreneur, not just guru coach, right? Like you've got so much experience. And yeah, thanks again for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to do it again. This has been a great conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.